everyone, my name is Megan, and this video is for the homeschoolers of KWCHEA about how to do speeches. I'm sorry that this is coming to you so much later than we had originally promised. Thank you so much for all of your support and for bearing with me on this. So the speech meet is next week, so I hope that at the very least your student has picked out topics that they like, maybe even drafted up an outline. So I'm just going to kind of go over some very general tips for writing a speech. I'm going to give you some very general tips for how to write a speech. And then at the end I will actually read one of my award-winning speeches to you. I think it was from grade 7 or 8. So the first thing is choosing a topic, and I advise that you choose a topic that is age appropriate for your student. So that means that younger students probably don't want to be delving into very deep theological topics, and that means older students should probably stay away from speech topics like cats or animals. So animals, geography, those are great topics for younger students. Older students might want to think of natural phenomenons, biblical stories and interpretation, public figures that they admire and why they admire them. Even political topics can be a good idea sometimes. Personal stories and collections, those kinds of topics are going to fare great amongst the older students. Some of the topics that I did as a younger student include Harry Potter, lightning and the phenomenon of lightning. My sister did a speech on Barbie dolls and the phenomenon of the Barbie as younger students. As older students, we did speech topics such as do hard things, so about how teenagers can avoid falling into these stereotypes that of teenagerism. I did a speech on Shakespeare, World War II, and my personal connection to my grandfather in World War II. So those were some of the topics that we did as older students that fared very well for us. Writing the speech is going to be very similar to writing an essay. You want to divide it into the opening, the middle, and the closing. The opening is set up to be tell them what you're going to tell them. Really great to start with some kind of catchy, jazzy intro, something that makes people kind of question what you're going to talk about, kind of keeps them on edge. Starting out with something humorous is always good. Something really, really deep might be really good. And that's going to set up the student to be grabbing the attention of the judges, grabbing the attention of the people who are going to be listening to the speech. The body of the speech is, of course, to talk about what the topic is. So for my lightning speech, I explained all about the phenomenon of lightning, where it comes from, why people like it, ties to biblical relevance. So it's really important that your student's topic ties back to some sort of biblical applicability. Now, that doesn't mean that the entire speech has to be about something from the Bible, but it does have to tie back to, so for instance, a student in 4th or 5th grade who's doing a speech on cats could talk about the story of creation very briefly and how on the 6th day God created animals and the like. I think in the lightning speech I talked about God creating the cosmos. I think I talked about the story of Job when God is talking to Job and saying, did you create the lightning and all of the heavens? And just other displays of lightning being used when Jesus died to split the temple curtain, that kind of stuff. So my entire speech throughout was not related to the Bible itself, but I was able to talk about connections to the Bible and lightning. And then, of course, the ending is going to be a quick recap of what you have said. It's great to end with something snappy. Again, another humorous joke, but it should be a very quick, abrupt ending. Should be nice and clean, shouldn't leave anything left unstated about the topic. My advice is always write less, speak slow. And that's something that I had the hardest time learning. I'm a quick talker. Hope I'm not talking too quick throughout this video. But the best thing your student can do is write less, speak slow. Pauses are your best friend in public speaking. Pauses let the listener know that something is coming next. I had a speech I did about World War II and my grandfather's own involvement in World War II, and I told it from his perspective as a young teenager in the war. And I paused throughout the entire thing to let the gravity of the situation really sink in with the listeners. Your topic doesn't have to be deep and dark like that to take advantage of pauses. It's really great to stop and pause at the end of every paragraph to let that information sink in and to speak nice and slow. So once your student has written their speech, it's time to get to memorizing it. Memorizing is going to be the hardest part, and with only a week to go, it is going to be critical to get that speech written within the next day or two. By Tuesday, you really, really want to be learning that speech. We used to say our speeches over and over and over and over and over and over until I could still say most of these speeches in my sleep. They've been drilled into my head that hard. So it's going to be really important to practice with your student. And you want to have them practicing as though they are standing in front of that full audience. My mother used to line up teddy bears along our bed. She used to make the dogs sit down next to us, and we would, practice our speeches in front of each other with the full gravitas of it, with all of our hand gestures, all of our movement, all of our emphasis, all of our pauses. So it's going to be really important to be practicing that. Students are not allowed to use props, but they are allowed to use cue cards. Cue cards will vary by the student and how well their speech is memorized. If a student feels very, very confident that they have the entire thing front to back memorized, no cue cards. You can go with cue cards for this first meet, and if your student makes it on to the second round, they can drop the cue cards. I personally stopped using cue cards, I think around grade 5. I just really preferred to be able to use my hands, as you can tell from this video. I found it really great to be able to gesture to the judges, to gesture to the audience. I think it enhances that visual storytelling and really pulling people in. Now I'm very self-conscious about my hands. But you're really going to want your student to be, you really want to put as little information as possible on that cue card. The more that's there, the more your student is going to want to rely on it. I don't know why that is, but pretty much every public speaker will tell you that the more that there is on their cue cards, the more that they are tempted to look down. And when they're looking down, they're not going to be as engaged anymore. Already, you're losing that personal feeling with me because I'm not looking at you anymore. And I'm losing that personal feeling of being with you and speaking with you because my head is down. So it's going to be really important that as little information as possible is on those cue cards. Now, if your student doesn't feel 100% comfortable, like they have it 100% memorized, that's okay. Put the whole speech on cue cards. Practice with the cue cards. As soon as possible, drop the piece of paper, practice with cue cards so that the student can practice holding them. They need to be held way down low at the stomach level so that they're not going to be up in front. When you're holding them up in front, obviously now you've lost my face and you've lost my mouth. And that's one of the most important parts because that's where I'm speaking from. So they want to be down nice and low, held out a little bit from the body and slanted upwards. And the student needs to just practice every time shuffling the cue card. They want to just take it back, obviously, as they're flicking through the cue cards. One of the biggest parts of speech delivery is, of course, volume, enunciation, and that connection with the audience. Does your student believe what they're saying? Are they smiling throughout the whole speech? Unless they're doing a little bit of a deeper topic, then they should have an appropriate facial expression. I didn't smile the whole time I did my World War II speech, but I did smile the entire time I did my Shakespeare speech, because Shakespeare is fun and funny, and I made it a very humorous speech to do. So you want to make sure that your student is getting practice, speaking like a public speaker, speaking in a way that's going to capture people's attention. The same is going to go for poetry, for 1st to 3rd grade poetry. The way that I said choose an appropriate speech topic for your student, you want to choose an appropriate poem for your student. So my sister, when she was in grade maybe 2 or 3 and she did poetry, she chose a poem called Mice. And it was a cute little poem, but it was about 16 lines long. That was it, and there wasn't much substance to it. And she went up against a speaker who chose, I don't know what the poem was, but it was this beautiful, long, lyrical piece. And of course, the little poem about mice couldn't really hold a candle to it. So make sure that you're choosing something that has some substance to it. I believe that poetry does not have to have a biblical tie to it. It does not have to have a biblical tie to it because my sister spoke on mice and that didn't have a biblical tie. So poetry can be about whatever you would like it to be. You can choose a biblical scripture verse. 1 Corinthians 13 is a great choice. The 23rd Psalm is another great choice, but make sure it has a fully poetic ring to it. So you don't want to be doing a gospel piece because that's going to read much more like a story and not enough like a poem. You want to do something that your student can fully understand. So if your student is not old enough to fully comprehend the meaning behind 1 Corinthians 13, then you may want to choose something that's going to be more appropriate. Whereas if your third grader has talked about 1 Corinthians 13 before and understands what they're talking about, then that's going to make for a much more believable poetry recitation. Poetry has to be memorized 100%. You can't have any cue cards up there with you. That is part of the grading criteria, that they are word perfect. They will lose marks for every word that they either omit, get wrong, add in, that kind of stuff. So make sure that student knows their poem front to back. I did also want to note that speeches need to be between 3 to 5 minutes for everybody who is in grades 4 to 9. And then grades 10 to 12, if there's any older students, they need to be 5 to 7 minutes. I personally like to write a 4-minute speech. That gives me lots of time. If I speak too fast, I've got a minute of buffer time. And if I speak really slowly, I've also got a minute of buffer time. I'm usually a speak too fast person, so I would actually go probably more like 4.5 minutes because I could count on myself to speak too fast. But somewhere between 4 and 4.5 minutes is going to be the perfect speech length. And finally, make sure your students know it's just a speech. This is something that they should be doing for fun. Speeches have been a big part of my life. I'm now going to law school. Law school has moots and mock trial competitions. Law involves a lot of public speaking. I've done mock trial competitions all throughout my undergraduate. I've done presentations in classes, participation marks, and whatnot. I credit speeches with a huge part of my success in learning to public speak at a very early age. My sister recently had to do a presentation at a college class of hers, and she had multiple classmates, as well as her professor, coming up and telling her, "Your presentation was amazing." And she said to them, "That's because my mom made me do speeches." She wouldn't have said to you back in 5th or 6th grade that she liked doing speeches, but she got comfortable with it, and eventually she did end up loving them, and they're now a big part of her success too. So make sure your student knows that it's not going to be all about winning the speeches. Everybody has awesome wins, and everybody has big losses. I went to the provincial finals with the Legion. I would have been grade 10 or 11, something like that. I came 2nd place, and I bawled my eyes out because I wanted first. But it was a great experience getting to go all the way through. Looking back, I'm so proud of how I did. But if your student is disappointed with a loss, that's okay. That's just how it goes sometimes. We all have our good and bad days. So I did want to leave you with one of my speeches. I am going to be reading it off here. I don't quite remember this one front to back, but this was a speech that I did in either 7th or 8th grade. It was on Harry Potter. I'm going to read it for you. I'm going to try to do it as close to the way I would have delivered it back then as possible. So here you go. Here's Harry Potter. Are you a Harry embracer or a Harry resistor? Are you like me, a Harry enthusiast? Or are you like some who are anti-Harry or even Harry-phobic? Honorable judges, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I suspect you know the books written by J.K. Rowling that tell the adventures of an English schoolboy and his year-by-year escapades at Hogwarts School for Wizards. Harry is not just an ordinary student, though. He is famous in the wizard world for being the only person to survive an attack by the most evil of all evil wizards, Voldemort. Unfortunately, Harry Potter books have been wrongly criticized and even forbidden by some Christians who believe that the books will foster interest in the world of the occult. Nothing could be further from the truth. Harry Potter is not only contrary to the Christian faith, it actually supports it. The series echoes the great story that we have been wired by God to seek, receive, and respond to. They reflect every Christian's battle with the flesh, the world, the devil, and the longing to resist evil and serve good. Where is the Christianity in Harry Potter, you ask? The author, a self-proclaimed Christian, asserts that the way to understand her books is to understand her faith. She periodically quotes scripture word for word in her books, including 1 Corinthians 15:26, when a character claims that the last enemy to be destroyed is death. Another Harry Potter character tells us that death is not the end, but the next great adventure, which is something that Christians already know. You can find God in Harry Potter through the author's use of Christian names, symbolisms, and conflicts. For example, the character Godric Gryffindor's name means godly or worshipful golden lion. Harry's dad is James, like the disciple James, Jesus' brother, and James's friend, who betrayed him in the storyline, was Peter, the same name as Peter who denied Christ. Harry plays a sport where his position on the team is seeker. So is all of humanity. The use of Christian symbolism in Harry Potter is hard to miss. The hero, Harry Potter, whose name translates to heir of the Potter being God the Creator, has a Christ-like journey and suffers a near-death experience and a subsequent resurrection in each book. In Book 1, after a symbolic 3 days. This contrasts with the evil Voldemort, who craves immortality, has a disregard for human life, and literally renders his soul into pieces for power and personal advantage. The monster Voldemort is the answer to the question that Christ asked in Mark 8, verse 36. What shall it profit a man if he should gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Harry's mentor, Albus Dumbledore, offers his blood as a sacrifice to break a spell, collapses to near death, rises, and saves Harry. Later, Dumbledore dies a sacrificial death after showing mercy to a student or disciple who has betrayed him. Dumbledore offers the student forgiveness, sanctuary, and freedom from evil and death. In the end, Dumbledore is believed to be murdered by those he came to save. The conflict of humankind is evident through Harry's struggle in each book, which is the story of every person, the battle over the darkness within our own hearts. The irony of Harry Potter, largely due to Christians' objections, is that this wonderful message of faith is brilliantly reaching those most resistant to Christian belief, those who need the message the most. The author of Looking for God in Harry Potter, John Granger, claims that the gospel has rarely, if ever, been smuggled into the hearts and minds of readers so successfully or profoundly. So I ask you once again, are you a Harry foe or a Harry friend? Thank you. So that's my speech. Again, I did that as a bit of an older student, which is why I did talk about Christian symbolism the entire time, because I was able to comprehend all of the symbolism that I was talking about. Younger students, again, don't feel the need to do a fully Christian speech the entire time. It's perfectly fine to talk about more mundane subjects and then inject a biblical application into just one paragraph. So I hope that this has helped. I can't wait to see everybody next week. Feel free to email me. Lucina can give you my email. If you'd like to reach out and ask me any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them for you. Best of luck. I can't wait to hear everyone's speeches. Bye!